close to 60 people, 65 people over the course of yesterday and today who came and joined us in this opportunity to talk about rebranding our downtown. So I want to introduce Joe here from the Wisconsin Main Street Focus.
I want you to say my last name.
Lanwazak.
That's pretty good.
Is it Lanwazak?
Lonzak. Yeah.
Lanwazak.
Lonzak, yeah.
It's harder to spell.
It is much harder to
I did.
spell.
I was guessing ages the other day earlier because I always say I could be a carny. I'm usually 2 years apart, 2 years away. So I got 1 year for him. Jay was 1 year, but I messed up on him. I was 3 years apart from him.
She gave me
I
credit.
aged him.
Experience credit, yeah.
It was experience. He seems so experienced. He seems older. Doesn't he seem? I mean, he looks younger, but he seems like he should be older.
Wise beyond his years. Well, like Robin said, my name is Joe Lonzak. I'm the downtown design specialist with the Wisconsin Main Street program. I have been here since Ben was born. No, it's been almost 18 years. And one of the things that we really like to provide to our communities, probably the thing that excites me the most, is our ability to bring in outside consultants to focus on a particular aspect of what your community needs. And more often than not, branding usually comes up. And I'll make them blush a little bit, but I don't think there's a better person in the country for branding for a downtown specifically or for a community than Ben. He's been doing it for 21 years, and it shows. And I wasn't able to be here yesterday for all the focus groups and everything. Aaron Welty from our office was there. But I will say that with Jay and Ben here, I can't think of anyone that I would trust more. I figured it out on the way here. I have worked with Jay and Ben combined 30 years, so I think 16 years and 14 years.
Right.
So I trust them with everything that they do. Ben, I have seen Ben make people cry before. In Port Washington, he came up with this really good, touching thing about what the community is. It was called We Are Port. And when he got done reading it, we were all in tears. And I don't know if that's going to be the case here. If we're going to cry.
That's a good cry.
Yeah. Tears are assured. The emotion behind the tears are still undecided.
So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Ben. But I'm always excited about this because branding is so much more than a logo. It's so much more than everything. It's bringing everyone together, and I'm gonna let him go from here.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome.
And thank you. I want to echo the remarks in terms of coming out again and participating again. We talked to 65 or so folks. And as you can imagine, I mean, what you're getting ready to see is the culmination of a stunning 28 hours. So, I always like to say it can't be the whole answer, obviously. And there's so many different dynamics that are going on here in La Crosse. So I hope that you get a couple things out of this. I hope that, first of all, you get kind of an overall spirit of some of the things that we felt like really stuck out. I hope that you learn a little bit about what seems to make sense in telling the community story and how some of the organizations in the community work together to tell that story. If the only goal here was just to think about DMI and just to focus in on how to talk about downtown La Crosse, we wouldn't really be doing the community service because there are too many different stories to tell, and you really can't just focus on one because that creates these columns of communication, and it just makes it harder for everybody to be successful in their communication. So I think what you'll do, you'll see kind of an overall general series of thought of what makes sense and some common sense on how you can adopt some tools and tactics that really tie things together. So I always like to start with looking at some of the things that exist. You're all familiar with these, I'm sure. Everything from the school district, the Grand River, great city. And you'll hear, I'll kind of share with you some observations along the way. People love using the bridge. That's of no surprise. I know, she does.
No, I don't hate it. I know someone else in the room that hates the use of the bridge more than I do. The overuse of the bridge.
Here's the one thing. Here's the one thing that I want to be very, very clear about the use of the bridge. Simply having everybody go to the same visual element, but having no consistency in that visual element is not actually consistency. It actually appears almost weak when you use the same thing, but everybody uses it in a completely different way. When you look at the city, the Grand River Great City logo, you see an illustration of one of the difficult components of the bridge. The bridge by nature is intended to span two bodies of land that are separated by the country's widest river. So the element itself is remarkably horizontal and wide. I absolutely adore what the library has just done with their new logo. Being able to take the subtle reference of the arch and the subtle reference of the suspension, and they have been able to show the bridge in a composition that is square, that hasn't dictated it to be so wide. So, being able to find ways that you can do that, as the chamber recently created their new logo, again, that kind of subtle addition of just using the components, the arch and the suspension, that gets the point across. I'm not featuring that in the logo for downtown because I think that there's some other things that are a little cleaner that we want to do. But as we dig in, there were also 4 organizations that really started to stick out because was it the city that
Synergy conversation.
Yeah, who was it that mandated that conversation or requested that conversation or suggested that maybe
I
that?
would say more so some of our top investors.
Gotcha. So obviously you've got DMI, you've got the Chamber, you've got LADCO, and you've got Lacrosse. You've got Explore Lacrosse. This synergy group, as it's referred to, they've done a lot of work together. They've got a good open line of communication, which automatically is going to win points. It is amazing to me how many times you go into a community and these groups see each other as enemies instead of working off the same team. It is difficult for communities to figure out how these organizations should work together. Unfortunately, I cannot tell you how many times I will come into a community. I was telling somebody earlier about Vicksburg, Mississippi. Vicksburg is a eastern Mississippi river town. They're right on the Mississippi River. A lot of similarities to you guys in terms of just character right on the river. We were hired by the Main Street organization to come in and develop a brand for the city. Now, this was after the CVB had spent $90,000 to have a community brand developed, and then their CVB wouldn't let anybody use anything. So then we went in for not $90,000 working with the Main Street, and then the city was like, hey, can we participate? And then the chamber was like, hey, can we participate? So then all of a sudden you have everybody else, but the CVB didn't want people to use what they had. That's silly. You are not competing against one another. You are competing against the other communities that are vying for talent and resources and investment. So there's been, from an organizational standpoint, you all have done the hard work. You've created the relationship. You've created the platform for communication. And one of the good things that can come out of this today is showing some very simple tactics that will allow you to now start to eliminate some of the gaps that maybe exist graphically while still preserving the individuality. But again, I don't ever want to lose focus on the fact that the primary goal here is working with DMI. So I want to introduce this idea to you. This is something that we've been talking to a lot of folks about. We oftentimes get asked the question, why is it that we're 40 years into the Main Street movement and nobody knows what Main Street is? If you've ever talked to a Main Street manager, one of their biggest frustrations is constantly having to explain to people what in the world they do. So we were first hired by the state of Florida, and since then we've worked in Florida and Colorado and Michigan and South Carolina and Mississippi and Arkansas, talking to them about how do you communicate about Main Street. And we've come to this interesting realization. Every Main Street organization shares the same 5 primary audiences. Now, we can get really hung up on the nuanced targets underneath that, but at the end of the day, they're always talking to donors, they're always talking to owners, they're always talking to the public, they're always talking to their volunteers, and they're always talking to government. And you can literally fit everybody into that. When you look at DMI here in La Crosse, the overwhelming majority of all their graphic identity was always historic downtown La Crosse. And with the most recent revision, it's been simplified down to downtown La Crosse, but it's always been destination driven. The overall awareness of the organization is maybe a little bit muddied inside that identity. If the organization does something that irritates a business owner, are we now positioned where they're no longer going to be likely to promote downtown because they've been turned off by this group that's represented by this logo that you're asking for them to market with? It's kind of a weird dynamic. So we're going to dig into that a little bit. We're going to hit on some things that hopefully will help to clarify some of that difference. That relationship with donors is very much a DMI relationship. The relationship with owners is a DMI relationship. The relationship with the public is a downtown relationship. So understanding how the message relates to the audience will be important for us. The next thing that I always like to cover, and I'm going to spend more time on this than I normally do, La Crosse is not a small community. You know, you've got 50 some odd thousand population, you've got people all around you. There were so many storylines that I found to be intriguing. There's so many storylines that make it very, very difficult to figure out what is your stage to tell the story. So obviously you have your connection of being a home to higher education. You've got 3 universities. The 3 universities create a lot of dynamics about the community where you're used to people coming in. We heard about how, you know, we're getting 4,000 new residents every year, and that's one dynamic. You also have the byproduct of what we call the red solo cup effect, where when you have college students, they tend to imbibe, and then, you know, that leads you to the whole downtown La Crosse. It's intoxicating, you know. So you have all those things of how do we manage those identities in the right way? How do we make sure to use all the positive attributes of higher education while not allowing it to completely and totally shape every perception? If there was any one consistent negative or fear of kind of a negative perception, it was, this is a drinking town. You know, it's like we're a drinking town with a river problem. And you got to figure out how to better shape that and tell the rest of the story. There's another concept, and I just wrote it up there as born of fun. Your name, La Crosse, and you literally were a place where different people from different backgrounds came together to compete against one another and to have fun. And you were founded by a teenager. They were a 19-year-old, discovered this place. And those are some interesting backstories that I think can kind of factor into your storytelling. You know, this fact that you literally have a foundation of fun, having a good time, and a place that truly was founded by youth and was built on that kind of that inspiration. And so, you know, it's not hard to make a storyline that connects a 19-year-old founding the place and 3 institutions of higher education. It's not hard to take a sport like lacrosse that is experiencing rapid growth. It's the largest growing sport in high school age students in America, and you're named after that. So all those things I think are things that you can kind of play around with. So I kind of threw that idea of historically young. Again, just concepts that kind of resonated. This is the place where the East turns to the West. You know, we all know that St. Louis is the gateway to the West. You don't want to go and kind of take that road, but you really do serve in a very interesting place as you think about that in the country. We heard a lot about the Driftless region, the topography that's here. You have more here. You have a diversity. You have a nature about you that is unexpected from other parts that surround you. You were a place that nature spared to a certain degree, which is kind of an interesting concept. you are connected to the mighty Mississippi, but a very different Mississippi than most of America thinks of. And that, again, is another really, really interesting story to be able to tell. You carry a pristine nature. You carry where I heard earlier today, I think your dad said 117 miles from the headwaters or something of the Mississippi. Does that sound about right? So, being able to kind of tell that story goes a long way. And then I just wrote the word match. I think one of the things that Jay brought up was, you don't have a lacrosse game, you have a lacrosse match. And that simple word match, even though it might not necessarily apply to downtown, that's a really great word when we start to talk about LADCO, when we start talking about economic development and that perfect match and the place where, so again, understanding the storylines, having a good community brand is not about forcing everybody to say the exact same thing over and over again. It's about having the right thing to say at the right time to the right person. Okay? Everybody following along so far? Does that make sense? Any questions yet? I mean, anything you're like, well, what do you think about this? Or okay, good. Okay, so the next thing that we did, and I put it over there, that I reviewed the branding guidelines of the 4 synergy partners. And the 4 synergy partners brought to the table 17 colors and 14 typefaces. That's not what we call an easy system to work with, right? So the first thing that we wanted to do was we wanted to look through the colors and see if we could start to consolidate some colors so that we could use colors for connectivity. Some people they're convinced that every single entity needs to have an identity that's all their own. But you don't really want to think about your organizations of your community as completely different things. You almost want to think of them more as different departments and initiatives of a university. Like your athletic department is not going to look completely different than your sociology department. There are going to be certain elements that are shared. But if you're attracting somebody to a research institution for, cellular level study, that is dramatically different than if you're trying to get somebody to come in and play collegiate soccer. So being able to have the connection that draws strength, but then also the versatility to be able to cater your message. So what I did was, in looking through all of them, there were similar colors that started to emerge that really revolved around these 5 colors. A kind of a deep blue, a lighter blue, a green, a yellow, kind of golden yellow, and a warm orange. Now, in addition to that, all 4 of the systems had some sort of sans serif typeface that was essentially exactly alike, but different. So what I did was I looked at those, and I can tell you a couple of them. CVB uses Axis. Downtown was using one called Lado. Chamber was using Roboto, and Lado was using LADCO. Was using Montserrat. So in looking at those, we landed on this Montserrat. It's a really, really nice typeface. And anybody want to guess how we picked this one of those options? What word was most important to look at and make sure it looked good? Lacrosse. Your name. We wanted something that was going to consistently have your name in it. And nobody's ever really let us change their community's name, so you kind of have to deal with what you're dealt. And lacrosse has a couple interesting nuances. So if you adopt this, and again, everything that you're seeing it's just different weights of the same typeface. So you actually have a lot of different variation that can occur in a single family. But because of these typefaces, this kind of typeface is designed to be content neutral. Is anybody nerdy enough to have watched the documentary on the typeface Helvetica? I'm the kind of person that my wife got me that for Christmas, and I thought it was like the coolest thing ever. I think a lot of times what we do is we think that when we select a typeface, the job is to try to find a typeface that best reflects the personality of the community. So if you have a historic downtown, you're going to pick some sort of script. That or you're going to go with papyrus. It's like, just because you're old, you don't have to use papyrus. So what these sans serif typefaces are is they're actually designed to be content neutral on purpose. They're designed to bring no personality to the table, but instead simply convey information so that you can truly build the personality around the tool to tell who you are. That's why Helvetica is Bloomingdale's, Jeep, for a long time Walgreens, like Crate and Barrel, all these companies that we know that are dramatically different from one another are all using Helvetica. And literally every single person has Helvetica on their computer. So you can create the Jeep logo in like 3 seconds, yet it's worth billions of dollars, you know? So it's kind of, you got to think about, it's not always making it more complicated makes it good. Oftentimes making it simpler is what makes it good. So what we did was, when you look at La Crosse in Montserrat, this is what it looks like. And you had one dynamic that really you have to address, and it's the relationship between the L and the A. Typically, typefaces, you want to make sure that the bottom leg of the L is not too long. Sometimes they make them longer than they need to be, which end up creating this really awkward space there. And then when you couple an L with an A, you end up creating this crazy trapezoid of weirdness. You know, it's kind of like that awkward silence at a first date, you know? So you want to make sure that you do something that is going to address that situation. So we truly created a custom word type where we run that L and the A together so that that little itty bitty gesture of being deliberate turns a typeface into a word mark. It creates that ability for you to consistently use that treatment over and over again. Okay? Does that make sense, everybody? So from there, the thing that we first wanted to start with was we wanted to dig into the destination. And in the destination, we had a couple things that you guys talked about. There's been a lot of thought that's gone on here in the community. This idea of being able to maybe lean towards something that was round. There was some strength to that, and you know, it's one of those things where it's kind of like, okay, I mean, if there's been a deliberate process to think about things, and people like the idea of being able to have that strength, let's kind of go with that. We wanted to have something that had vibrancy and energy and color to it. I wanted something that was maybe a little bit complex, but complex in the simplest way. So layers, depth, something that was symbolic of multiple components coming together. I didn't want crossed lacrosse sticks. I made a point to, you know, not go there. But there were a couple things that I felt like came up over and over again. People were proud of the connection of the river. There's a concept there. I have not landed on what the phrase is, but like you are a true river town on America's river. And there is a certain place of prominence that you deserve. Like if you go all the way down the river, there are not very many communities that either address it the way that they should or own that connection. And honestly, as the river goes farther south, it changes to the point where a lot of communities start to turn their back on the river. So owning that connection was one. Owning downtown La Crosse as the perfect place to serve as a base camp to the amazing outdoor recreation that surrounds you, I think is something else that's really good. And just also just that place that although you're a dense and historic downtown, you also have this natural connection because you've got this, you know, this resource running straight through you. There's a definite energy here. When you come to La Crosse, you don't feel like a place that, you're not in a place that's stagnant. You actually feel that there's energy and movement here. You can see new things happening. You can see new businesses coming in and that kind of stuff. And then the other thing that I will say is actually somewhat surprising, and I might get hit on this one from other communities, but there's a warmth here that you don't normally see in the Midwest. The Midwest is a warm region, but it's a warm after they get to figure out your intentions region. You know what I mean? Like, it starts with being skeptical, and then it turns warm once they figure out your intentions. I truly believe that because of the combination of these institutions of higher education, because of the presence of being a river town and having people constantly pass through this place, it has made you a very quickly warm community. It's a place that you feel it without a lot of time having to earn the warmth. And that should be something that you're really proud of. So we wanted to kind of create this icon, taking those components and kind of putting them together, and it just kind of looks like this. It's this kind of simple overlapped icon, but when it starts to fit in, you start to see something that starts to look like this. And you see this phrase that we threw out there. We wanted to do something for downtown that was really bold. And this idea of live mighty. It's a... I don't know anybody else that's ever said that. I don't know anybody else, unless you're on the mighty Mississippi, that would choose to ever use that word. The word is a bit problematic, I will say, but it's worth it in your circumstance. You know what I mean? Like, it would be easy to dismiss other places if the connection wasn't so great. But you have such a diversity, such a wealth of opportunity. And what you start to see as you look at the system is you start to see these options that can exist. Like, for the longest time, historic downtown La Crosse had a tall rectangle, and that was it. And, finally it was like, all right, we got to have something that has some variation here. So they moved to an adapted version that was a little bit more round. And really what you start to see is once you adopt a color palette, you adopt a typeface, you adopt kind of this approach to an icon, it allows you this opportunity to really experiment with a lot of different diversity. You can't launch everything at the beginning, but as you start to make and create the connection, the expansion can start to work for you. All the way down to really using, we had a college student in here a little while ago who taught us that it's lax. And we have to know that so that we don't have anybody say, well, you can't say that because it's LAX. Like, look, guys, if somebody is confused between the airport in Los Angeles and La Crosse, Wisconsin, it's okay to dismiss their confusion. You know what I mean? It's like, that's one of those things where it's like, let's just go ahead and adopt the vernacular. So, being able to have those different variations, that expandability, one of the things that Jay and I did was we took a little bit of time and we just kind of thought about how you can have some expandability that ties into that mighty cool, mighty fun, mighty tasty, mighty surprising, mighty inspiring, mighty fresh, mighty fine. It gives you that opportunity to have a very simple phrase that then becomes expandable. And then, you could go through and you could see where businesses in the community, like, I don't know, if you had, this is a hypothetical, a boutique hotel that was used to make chocolate there, right? Then, you could use words like delicious or luscious, or like, there are any number of things that you could do that take your brand and your essence and tie it in to this simple concept and kind of having that connective tissue. So, that is the kind of thing that you want to do from the destination side. You want to be able to have something, a logo like this would be made freely available to the business community. It would be freely available. In fact, would be encouraged to make merchandise, to create things that people could take away from here. This is not the kind of thing where it's like, let's put up every barrier and roadblock so that you can't use it. Because it doesn't represent any one organization. It represents the district as a whole. But then from there, we have to look at the organization. Now, I want to be very deliberate here. Essentially, DMI has been operating for years with no actual DMI logo. You know, there's a variation there that kind of hits on it just for technicality's sake, but it was always one and the same. So I'm introducing a new logo for DMI. Again, it's not going to be used that much. You're gonna be able to kind of feel it out when you're going out and asking for sponsorships. You're gonna have the DMI identity in there. DMI stands for Downtown Main Street Incorporated. Your particular name has Main Street all as one word. I wanted a very simple icon that, again, it kind of pays tribute to the downtown icon in terms of 4 components coming together, because Main Street uses the 4-point approach, but I needed it to be a different icon. I did not want it to be the exact same thing because I didn't want the visual confusion to occur. I wanted there to be some clarity. So what I did was I simply created something that looks like this. It's more of interlocking components that are tying in together. You get this downtown Main Street, you get a stacked version, a horizontal version. It is okay to kind of wrap your arms around DMI if that's what everybody says. I hate making acronyms like if they're not already used. But if they're used and people are saying it, just go ahead and own it. It's okay. But then each one of those colors represents one of your committees and one of the elements of the 4-point approach. So it just gets you thinking what the relationship between the organization identity and the downtown look like. But where it starts to get fun is with the extension, because there are these great events that go on in downtown. So what you can start to do is like for Restaurant Week. Now all of a sudden you tie that in, the icon connects, it makes sense. And every single time you create a derivation of it, it deposits more meaning into the simple icon in the first place. We try to do too much with our graphic design sometimes, so start simple and then earn meaning instead of trying to throw all the meaning in on the front end. Summer days, again, kind of a cool, like being able to show it doesn't always have to be all the colors because it's round. You can be simple with it. You can tie it in. Same thing with the holiday season. We talked a lot about that. You have a series of events, but kind of branding it as hometown holidays and being able to kind of stitch together the whole holiday season. And then you simply take that icon and turn it into an ornament. Like it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But then again, those are kind of the events. Now I will say, I was experiencing some technical difficulty, so I had walk around. I have a couple others that I'll go back and redo, but my Illustrator program was kind of botching up on me, so it caused a little frustration. But I wanted to be able to hit some of those big events so you can kind of see what that expansion looks like. But then from there, I also wanted to talk a little bit about these synergy partners. I want to start off with the city, even though the city technically isn't in those 4. The city's right alongside it. And I told you I love the library logo. So what I would love to see, and this is kind of a big design no-no, and whoever designed the library logo is probably going to hate me for saying this out loud, but the logo is just really, really strong. So imagine if you actually deconstructed and reconstructed, and you essentially take that icon and you actually propel it up to the city level. You allow the library to keep the very individual color palette that they have already adopted. They've incorporated in their website. They have vehicles wrapped with it on their bookmobiles. So you don't want to change that at all. But you could pop that up to the city level. Then you could start to play around with departmental variations where you start to use the colors out of your palette to represent those different departments that make it up. So all in all, that probably won't happen just because of the nuances of the way things are developed. But I think it does help us to see what a good, strong system would look like. And being able to have that city level that is looking at cues to these other quasi-governmental organizations, this should show you that the city should not go through some multi-month, multiple $1,000 branding process. Like, all the answers are kind of already there on the table. Let's just use them to create something that looks better than what we have. Now, again, moving through those synergy partners, this is the Explore La Crosse logo, simply adopting Montserrat instead of Axis. virtually no one would ever know that it was different. It looks and feels exactly the same, but now with a simple typeface adoption, they're kind of saying, yes, we believe in the power of everybody kind of using this same stage. The Chamber of Commerce recently went through and had a new logo created. So this has a couple things. First of all, it's adoption of the typeface. So now you've got the consistency through your typeface. And then what they had done is they had gone through and everything was just a 2-color logo. Chambers oftentimes have a lot of different programs that nest up underneath them. So having just 2 colors as the only 2 colors in their palette, it almost flattens out their purpose a little too much. So we created a 4-color variation of it with the adoption of the typeface, and then showed them how that can break out into the single color breakdowns. Now, Ladco was by far, of all the ones out there, yes, challenged. No, well, it was just off. It wasn't exactly what they needed. You want something that's clean, crisp, that performs well in the economic development arena. Economic development leans far more on confidence than it does on vibrancy. So you don't need all these colors and all that kind of stuff. So what I did was I adopted the same typeface, but I went with the ultra thin, something that I hadn't used a lot yet. And then I really went in and interlocked these letters so it felt like something that somebody had spent some time on. And then I simply created kind of that stylized icon that represents this idea of bridging things. You know, I mean, that connection point is something that they bring to the table. But, you know, more subtle, still using our colors from our color palette, but when you keep it in to just the kind of blacks and blues, light blues and dark blues, then it performs very well, but still maintains being a little more subtle. So now all of a sudden, you've got this relationship between these from an organizational standpoint, but you also have this opportunity to tie back into the community brand and talk about the things that they focus in on, where downtown might be really focusing in on creating and cultivating this local loyalty where, you know, you've got explore, connect, grow. So does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So they've got the organization side message, and then they have the very easy platform to tie in with the community-wide messaging. And then from there, just a couple other things that I wanted to hit on because I thought they were important. Wayfinding signage. As you go through your wayfinding signage, you do not want to incorporate that stylized icon that much. That icon is the thing that's probably going to be the first for you to look at changing down the road. It will evolve over time, but you can have a lot more confidence in kind of committing to some colors and some typeface. A lot of times we over-design the wayfinding signage. So you're going to have all the signs are going to have to meet what they call the MUTCD standard. That's the Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices. It's an absolutely stunning read from the U.S. Department of Transportation. And so all of these that I'm showing are compliant with their standards in terms of minimum letter height and all that kind of stuff. People love to look at these, see the colors, and say, you know what, we can employ a districting strategy and let's change the colors of the wayfinding signs so people understand the districts. I don't think you need to do that, but if you really, really want to get into districting, then you might want to think about banners. And what I'm showing here is you can have some kind of full color, nice, clean banners that approach in entry corridors. And then you can actually simplify that down to more single color street by street. And the thing that's important about the streets is we heard loud and clear, the grid pattern is a disjointed grid in your downtown. People are using every cue that they can to figure out when it stops. They're using kind of the density of retail and how far ahead they think they see other businesses that maybe look cool. When you start to use banners to educate people about where the destination lies and where, you know, how to navigate it, if I'm sitting here on J Street and I'm looking up J Street and I can see a corridor of green running up J Street, and then I see an intersection with a different color, it's going to automatically build intrigue. And it's going to make me want to feel like either A, I need to explore, Or if not that, it'll at least say there's something I didn't see. I haven't seen it all. A lot of times street banners are over designed. People, they start off of a clean white background and they start designing the banners, and then they end up, once it goes out into the space, it becomes more clutter than it does serve a strategic purpose. So that's why when you look at these, you might feel like there's just not a lot going on there, but it's not about having an art gallery. It's about creating a rhythm. Sometimes it's about kind of shrinking the roadway or understanding the street patterns and how they relate to one another. So I've been talking for 45 minutes straight. That's what we were able to do since yesterday. I'd love to take a second and kind of ask you, like, what are your thoughts overall? Does the strategy of how things might relate to one another make sense? Do you feel like you've got some stuff that maybe helped to provide some clarity with some of the issues that you've been fighting with? It's your turn. Yes, ma'am.
Do you need a nap?
Not yet.
I feel like this is a lot for like 24 hours.
Well, one of the things that we've always talked about with the process is, even though the process does put a lot on you, communities by nature, they need the ability to take a system and deploy it. And if the deployment and expansion of a brand system means that you're permanently tied to a design expert anytime you want to do anything, you'll never be able to deploy the brand, because communities simply don't have resources that way. So by putting ourselves in a situation where we are forced to create the expansion, we're actually testing the ease of use. I have to be able to create these event logos, and if I can't create them in a couple hours, then somebody who's never done this before won't ever be able to create them. But if we test it and we know that the expandability is there, and it doesn't mean that you're reinventing the wheel every single time you need a new graphic tool, then the ability to create is actually a testament that, yeah, it's a solid foundation, the colors are expandable, the typeface works, and it gives you a chance to kind of check out the recommendation and make sure you're not designing somebody into a corner that they can't get themselves out of. There are plenty of logos out there that are beautiful logos, but they can't work. They're either only work in one composition, or, wow, that looks great, but I can't ever make anything that complements it or looks like it. So what do I do with it? So
Can we go back to